Hello, good morning and welcome everybody. Hopefully you can hear me as I welcome you to our conference on leadership and diversity in social care. My name is Kathryn Smyth and I'm going to be taking you through the conference today. So I'm delighted that we have over 700 registered for today's conference, and I can see the number of participants is gradually going up in the box below. So hopefully we'll get some really good questions and some good participation today. I want to just start by thanking the sponsor, Relias. Relias are an online learning provider for care workers and care workers development. We can see a bit more information about them there. And so thank you very much, Relias, for making this possible today. If you haven't already done so, the nominations are now open for the Great British Care Awards 2021. Get your nominations in, and also the Leadership Awards 2021. And you can find out more about that by checking out the Care Talk and the Great British Care Awards websites to find out more. We've also got our conference coming up, which we are very much hopeful will be face-to-face. So we have a conference planned in June, from New Normal to New Future, coming out of a COVID conference. So if you haven't already registered for that, you can register online, and all of the delegates from today will be receiving an email offering them an online discount if you register before the end of the month. So really looking forward to that. It'd be really nice to see people face to face and get involved in some of the networking again, because we haven't done that for quite a while. So I look forward to that conference. So on to today's conference. So before we start, we have a question and answer function in Zoom. If you don't know how to use that, there's a little Q&A box at the bottom. If you just click on that, and you can submit your questions. And it's helpful to me if you let me know who you particularly want to answer your question. If you leave that up, and then I will just choose. And we'll have a question and answer session after the first two speakers, and then again after the second two speakers. So do submit your questions in there. If you've got any comments or feedback, you can use the hashtag there, CareTalkConf, on Twitter. Again, please do get your comments, questions, feedback, anything in there. And as I say, I am Kathryn Smyth. I am the Chief Executive of SCIE, the Social Care Influence Institute for Excellence, and I'm really pleased to be chairing this conference today and taking you all through this. I look forward. This is my favourite conference of the ones that we've got planned this week, because I think this is such an important topic. And I don't know if any of you seen the Care Talk magazine, but I wrote an article in there just coming out next month, which is just about diversity and leadership within social care. I think it's absolutely crucial that we get this right, and I'm really excited about the speakers that we've got today that can help us to get that. I'll just talk you through the agenda. So we've got, first of all, speaking very shortly is Jane Ashcroft. I'll give you a bit of an update on her shortly. Then we have Oonagh Smyth. We've then got questions and answers around about 11:40. Then 11:50, we've got Archibong, who will be speaking to us, and then Clenton Farquharson. We've then got questions and answers again. And then, of course, we'll be closed by 12:40. So I'll start by introducing Jane Ashcroft, who is our first speaker. So Jane is the Chief Executive of Anchor Hanover Group. Jane joined Anchor in 1999 from Bupa, and she was appointed Chief Executive of Anchor on the 9th of March 2010 and led the merger with Hanover Housing in 2018 to create Anchor Hanover, England's largest not-for-profit provider of housing and care for older people. Thank you, Jane. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. Yeah, that's how I used to look before lockdown. You can see that, like many of us, I'm really missing the hairdressers at the moment. It's a huge pleasure to be here today. Thanks very much for inviting me. As Kathryn said, the issues around leadership and diversity, I think, are so critical for the social care sector. So I'm looking forward to others' presentations, and I'm looking forward to everybody's questions and answers as well. So on my first slide, there's a quick overview of Anchor Hanover. Kathryn described us, we're the largest not-for-profit provider of housing and care for older people in England. So we operate 54,000 homes for older people. That's not care homes, that's individual units of housing for older people and rooms in care homes. So we provide services to just over 60,000 residents. People living in our services will be anywhere between 55 and 111. We have 111th birthday coming up. We operate across pretty much all of England. So we work in 85% of local authority areas in England, and across Hanover, there's about 10,000 colleagues in the organisation. As you can see, we have over 100 care homes. So we've got 114 care homes, and 9 of those were rated outstanding at their most recent CQC inspections. We focus heavily, as I'm sure everybody on this webinar does, on excellent quality of care for the people living with us. And that's never been more important than the last 12 months or so with the challenges that we've all been facing. So I'm going to focus today on the care services in Hanover, our care homes, and also our domiciliary care, which we provide into extra care services within the group. And when I talk about leadership, I mean all levels of leadership through the organisation. So of the 10,000 people in Hanover, many of my colleagues have leadership roles, and virtually everybody has a responsibility for leadership. So I'm going to draw the boundaries of leadership quite widely in my discussion today. Next slide, please. I do enjoy saying that. So this is a quick overview of the Hanover business plan. Our business plan is in the form of a picture. I learned many years ago that a big thick document on a shelf is not very attractive as a read, certainly not to me and not to other colleagues. So our business plan, this is a summary of a large picture that we have, which sets out what our priorities are as an organisation and how we're going to fulfil our responsibilities and our objectives during each year. I'll just quickly talk you through what we're all about. So at the top there, you can see that one of our objectives is about having more homes where people love living in later life. And our focus is on older people, as I said. So we're really keen to make sure that the homes that we operate, whether that's care homes or retirement housing, are places that people love living and have a great quality of life. And we're keen to make sure that we're providing more services. We know there's a lot of demand for good quality services. So we've got growth plans in both our housing and our care activities. If I move around in a clockwise direction, you'll see that more opportunities for colleagues is one of the 4 key pillars of our business plan. So I absolutely know whichever service I visit, if I ask the people living there what they value about Hanover, they will talk about my colleagues. So I know that my colleagues across the organisation are the most important thing to make the difference in the lives of our residents. So having opportunities for colleagues, for people to join Hanover, to progress their careers, learn new skills and do new things is absolutely one of our 4 priorities in the business plan. At the bottom, you can see we also seek to be more influential. This is about recognising that we've got 60,000 older people living in our services. And oftentimes decisions about older people's services are made without older people in the room, without the voice of older people in the debate. So we seek to make sure that we champion older people and we ensure and support our residents to participate in the debates about services for people in later life. And then the 4th element of our business plan is about efficiency. So it's making sure that we're spending our money on the things that make the biggest difference. We make sure we don't have shareholders as a not-for-profit organisation. So any money that we do make is reinvested into the organisation. And that then takes us in a virtuous circle because we've got money that we can spend on building more homes and money that we can spend on more opportunities for colleagues. So it is a virtuous circle. On the next slide, I've highlighted the values of the organisation. If I can have the next slide, please. And our values are about being accountable, respectful, courageous and honest. We have definitions of all of those because they could be empty words if we're not clear about what they mean. So accountability is about being positive, taking responsibility and doing what we say we're going to do. Respectful is about caring about people, showing kindness, putting excellent customer service at the heart of what we do, listening and encouraging a variety of perspectives. And I see the work that we do and our focus on diversity and inclusivity is very much linked to our value about being respectful of individuals and being inclusive of everybody, because everybody in the organisation brings something to help us with our success. We're courageous in that we try to shape a better future by constantly seeking to move forward and seeking to innovate, and by breaking down barriers and building connections through collaboration. And honesty is about integrity and demonstrating openness and transparency in everything we say and do. It's about being reliable, keeping things simple, and having honest conversations about what matters. On the next slide, I wanted to highlight one of the key elements of how we develop leaders in our organisation. So for the last couple of years, we've had a programme called My Future. This is a training programme for colleagues across our care services. The programme helps colleagues to train and develop their skills for more senior roles, taking people through to team leaders, deputy managers, and then home managers. Of the latest cohort of deputy managers who took part in the programme, 61% of them have already progressed into more senior positions. And we're now at the point where over half of our home managers have developed through the My Future programme in Anchor Hanover. I'm a big fan of growing our own and encouraging people to develop skills and opportunities within the organisation. Hopefully, being a national organisation gives us the capacity to give people opportunities if they need to move around geographically, if they want to progress their careers, or indeed if people want to move between our housing and care services. We're always keen to support people to do that. And My Future has been a really fabulous programme to give people the skills and the confidence to move into leadership roles. It's something that I'm really proud of. On the next slide, I've set out some of the key activities that we're undertaking at the moment around our equality, diversity and inclusion activity. Why diversity matters to me and why inclusivity matters so much to me and to Anchor Hanover is because we can't deliver person-centred services unless we have an organisation in which we value the individuals who work with us. So for me, equality, diversity and inclusion can only be delivered for our residents and for the people who we support if we have a diverse and inclusive workforce. And that's something that we're incredibly focused on. And we have a variety of different ways to encourage people to join our organisation. So as I've said, we're very keen to help people to develop their careers, but also keen to reach out and welcome new people into the organisation and into social care. Some of you might have seen in the last couple of years, we had a campaign and a recruitment programme to try and encourage men to come and work in the care sector. So that was called Are You Man Enough to Care? And we were really keen to encourage particularly young men who we didn't have many of in our care workforce to look at social care as a sector that they may not have thought about before, absolutely recognising that we want to make sure that our residents can have a wide range of different people to talk to, different people supporting them in all of our services. A lot of the work that we do around equality and diversity is really well supported by our colleague networks. So we have a Rainbow Network, a Disability Network, Embrace, which used to be called our BAME Network, but the Embrace Network have made some changes and I'll talk about those. And we also have inclusive ambassadors. So the aim of the Embrace Network is to support Anchor Hanover in promoting inclusion and actively addressing barriers or inequalities that may exist for colleagues or residents as a result of their race or ethnicity. Members of the Embrace Network have been working really closely with the organisation development team to develop a new module in our leadership pathways, and they've taken part in reverse mentoring programmes with senior leaders in the organisation. I was really lucky to be involved in the reverse mentoring programme. So I had a mentor from our Embrace Network, and we were able to really talk about her experiences from the community from which she came, her experiences in Anchor Hanover, in a way that I could never have learned about, because everybody's life experiences are different. I've moved on now and I have a mentor who's from our Disability Network, and the Disability Network is open to our colleagues who are living with disabilities and or caring responsibilities. It aims to provide information and support to our colleagues within an informal, confidential and peer-run environment. The network's playing a key part in highlighting potential barriers to colleagues with disabilities and helping us to identify potential solutions. For example, and somewhat obviously, we now subtitle everything we put out onto Workplace, which is our in-house communication platform. Our Rainbow Network is our group for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and plus colleagues. The plus stands for all sexual orientations and gender identities who aren't in the majority. It provides great support for colleagues and works with our LGBTQ+ resident group, aiming to increase understanding across Anchor Hanover of the challenges faced by the LGBTQ community. Some of the examples of recently delivered activity by the network include coordinating our attendance at Pride events a few years ago, and boy, we're all hoping we can get back to some Pride events this year, and supporting the design and delivery of our trans plus and LGBTQ+, I'm trying to speak too quickly, awareness training. We were also really delighted that we've recently achieved the House Pride Pledge, which is a housing award for housing providers who are aware of and supportive of the needs of the LGBTQ+ community. And then we have inclusive ambassadors who act as role models and allies to others across the organisation, challenging behaviour that isn't inclusive and supporting others to do the same. They support our in-house Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager and the colleague networks by promoting the activity of the networks and highlighting successes and opportunities at our locations across the country. For example, we had a Count Me In campaign when we were aiming to collect as much diversity data as possible, and we've been coordinating National Inclusion Week activity. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about colleague engagement. So you saw from the business plan priorities that more opportunities for colleagues is one of the key objectives of the Anchor Hanover plan. And listening to colleagues across the organisation is core to our culture. I'm very fortunate to sit in the middle of a large national organisation, and it's really important to me to hear from colleagues across the organisation in a meaningful way, and particularly important at a time like this when we're all working in different and unusual ways. So technology is at the centre of our approach around colleague engagement, as well as our in-house intranet, which is called The Bridge. We have Workplace, which is a Facebook product, which is vital to communicating and keeping colleagues regularly updated. Only about 20% of my colleagues in Anchor Hanover need to use IT services as part of their jobs. So actually Workplace, which is Facebook's enterprise social media tool, has enabled us to keep in touch and update colleagues at any time. During those early days of the pandemic, I was generally watching those 5 o'clock press conferences, and then afterwards able to put a briefing together and get that out by video to colleagues and get colleagues' questions back to me so that we could respond quickly. So our colleague engagement process is supported by an annual survey and regular feedback sessions. Our colleague engagement scores highlighted the success of our communication during the pandemic, with all leaders across the organisation involved in communicating with colleagues. So at 84% colleague engagement, that was the best score we've ever had in our colleague engagement survey last year. And that was based on a response rate of 86% of our colleagues responding to our detailed survey. I was so proud of the results that we had, and it really meant that I could be sure we were listening to the real issues that concern colleagues across the organisation. So on my final slide, I just want to emphasise how we've handled our listening and acting survey. So as I said, we have an annual survey and then quarterly surveys during the year. And we've had fabulous responses over the last year or so. By really asking colleagues to give us feedback on their views for working for the organisation, it allows us to develop the way we work based on the views of colleagues, not just me sitting in an ivory tower, or at the moment sitting in my back room in the Midlands, trying to work out what's the best to do for the organisation. Every year, our listening and acting survey has a theme, and last year's survey was baking. We kind of stole the idea from the Great British Bake Off. And we got colleagues very involved in the feedback process and completing the survey. There were cakes being posted all around the country. From the thousands of comments written in response to our survey, I know how important diversity is to our colleagues across the organisation. And I also know how important leadership's been during the pandemic and always in social care. So many people have shown leadership skills in the last 12 months. Not just those people whose jobs include leadership responsibility, but everybody who is working on a shift in a care home, who's providing services. Everybody needs leadership skills, and everybody needs a good leader that they can follow. I think one of the key parts of my job as a chief executive is to make sure that we're developing and recognising the leaders of the future, giving people skills so that they can be great leaders, so they can continue the success of our organisation, and so that we can continue to focus on excellence and provide brilliant services for the people that we support. I'd love to get some great questions from you when we get to the Q&A session, but for now I'm going to hand back to Kathryn. Thanks ever so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Jane. That was really great. And as Jane says, if you've got any questions for her, put them in the Q&A and we'll come to them after the next speaker. I was particularly interested there, Jane, where you were talking about having a mentor. I've tried that approach myself, and I think it's a really, really good way of leaders learning through lived experience of others as well. So I was personally really interested to hear more about that. Okay, I'm going to hand over to our next speaker now, who is Oonagh Smyth. Oonagh is the Chief Executive of Skills for Care. For 7 years, she was Executive Director of Strategy and Influence at Mencap, leading a directorate of around 500 people across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And Oonagh has held senior roles at the Northern Ireland Council for Voluntary Action and the Northern Ireland Equality Commission, senior roles in Westminster Equalities Partnership and the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. And she's also a former co-chair of the Care and Support Alliance, which is a cross-sector alliance of 80 social care organisations influencing at the highest government levels. Welcome, Oonagh.
Thank you, Kathryn, and thanks for asking me to present today. So as Kathryn said, I'm the CEO of Skills for Care, and I've been the CEO for coming up to a year now, but it's mostly been in lockdown, and so I still consider myself new, and I'm going to hold that badge until I can get out to meet people. So for those of you that don't know, Skills for Care is the strategic workforce body for adult social care in England, and leadership and diversity are things that I'm personally really passionate about. As Kathryn said, my background is equality and diversity, human rights, as well as social care, and I'm an executive coach in my spare time offering pro bono coaching for female leaders. So I think as well as me being passionate about diversity, equality and leadership, Skills for Care is also really passionate as well. So I'm going to focus quite a lot on management roles, but I completely agree with Jane that leadership extends way beyond those with leadership and management in their role title. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time focusing on roles. So just the next slide, please. So I suppose I just wanted to start by thanking all of the leaders and managers and everybody working in adult social care across England who really have held things together during the pandemic. I don't think there's any doubt that adult social care and the people supported by adult social care have been hit so hard by the pandemic, and I just can't imagine I suppose how much worse that would be without the dedicated professionalism of people working in social care. I do think our communities would have been stranded without people's professionalism and their skills and leading by example. There really wasn't a roadmap or a precedent for COVID, but I think our leaders and managers really responded to that challenge. But I do also recognise that relentless pressure takes its toll. And I don't think we will see the full implications of the mental and physical health issues until we finally exit or come out the other end, whatever that looks like, and return to some sort of new normal. But I think we also need to see this as a bit of an opportunity to build, to recognise and to maintain our leaders. Next slide, please. So this slide, I think, just gives a sense of the challenge, I suppose. And I feel like if we don't support our leaders growing and developing new leaders, as well as supporting current leaders, then we have very little chance of tackling any of the big issues in social care, such as the one that this slide talks about. So we're predicting in Skills for Care that we're going to need an extra 520,000 people working in social care by 2035, and that's on top of a high vacancy rate of 112,000 vacancies every day that we have currently. So I suppose what that indicates is we've got a short-term issue with not enough staff overall, and a longer-term one as that gap widens. And we know from research, and we'll all know from our experience, that management and leadership are absolutely key to recruitment and retention. And for example, our predictive analysis based on our data set of about half of the social care workforce shows that you're more likely to leave an organisation within the first year where there's a new registered manager, and where services with a new registered manager tend to have a higher turnover rate overall. So that just gives a sense of how key the registered manager role is particularly. Just the next slide, please. So just moving on to look at that registered manager role, we have 22,500 registered managers in adult social care, and it follows that as the workforce expands, we're going to need more people to lead and manage those people, and it's got to be people with the right values. So I really enjoyed listening to Jane, just having values really at the heart of Anchor's work, and I think we need to all remember that. And I think just thinking about our pipeline of new managers, how we find people, how we train them, but also how we make sure that they have the right values. And I also think that while we're thinking about new managers, we need to be aware of not losing experienced existing registered managers with the right values and skills that we need coming out the other end of the pandemic. And I think leaders and managers can be found at all levels of organisations and regulated professionals like nurses, occupational therapy and social workers, but also the role of registered managers, while it varies from service to service, and we know that, and we know that the skills required are really wide and they're really varied. They're not only legally responsible for a service, but they also really set the tone and the culture for how a service is run, and that's really important. And if we look at just one indicator, which is CQC ratings, we know that there's a direct link between a positive rating when being inspected and effective leadership. And I think those skills and commitment have been tested in the pandemic, and managers have worked so hard to keep people going. So I think I'd quite like to talk about two things really: how we support existing experienced values-led managers and leaders now, and then move on to talk about how we build a pipeline for the future. And then I'd like to finish just talking about our research with Black, Asian and minority ethnic leaders and managers, and what that's telling us. So we just move on to the next slide. So I just wanted to share this quote, which is from a frontline manager who accessed the support that we put in place from the start of the pandemic at Skills for Care. I think we quite quickly realised from feedback from our existing registered manager networks that unless we offered guidance and support, that even really experienced leaders were at risk of being overwhelmed and leaving the sector. We were hearing quite a lot of people experiencing burnout. And so from the start, I think we worked quite quickly to make sure that any of our existing local networks across England for registered managers could still meet. We moved quite quickly to meeting virtually and stay in touch. And actually that the membership has grown, the networks have grown, and the activity has grown quite a lot. So we've had about 2,000 participants in live webinars and about 12,000 people watching it after. And the thing that struck me was that what people found most useful was two main things. One was very technical operational issues, so rapid induction training, providing meaningful activities, but equally what we found people accessing most was peer-to-peer support. So I think there are lessons that we can learn as a sector in terms of what we do in the future, and for me that's about supporting managers to look after their own well-being, but also valuing peer-to-peer support. The external support that we offered, so access to helplines and things, just wasn't as popular as peer-to-peer support we facilitated. And there's just something about us recognising the value of building our own networks among people who really understand the context, and people reporting or talking about feeling that they're standing shoulder to shoulder with others, and sometimes just being able to say, you know, I'm struggling, and knowing that the other person understands that from a place of experience has felt really important, I think, and is something that we should take away. So if I just move on to the next slide. So then when we start to think about the future and closing that gap between the different roles and building our managers and leaders of the future, we know that some organisations have senior care coordinators or deputy registered managers, as Jane talked about, and some don't. We also know that the moves between those roles can feel quite significant, and so the need to support people who plan to step up in the way that Jane spoke about with the My Future programme, for example, it feels really important, I think. And I think that means that we need to make sure that we have a supply of well-prepared and aspiring future managers, and thinking about effective succession planning, especially because we know that around a fifth of the workforce, including managers, are likely to retire over the next decade. And so just thinking about how we build that pipeline. And one of the things that we've done at Skills for Care is we've established regional deputy manager networks to support succession planning and help create that pipeline. And we know that the building blocks that are important when supporting leaders and managers include things like peer support, opportunities for reflection, specific learning and development, and also really importantly, time away from their service to look outwards and to reflect. And that feels like something that we probably need to make a little bit more time for. And then the final point I'd like to make on this slide was that I feel like we really do need to make sure that registered managers are recognised as the professionals that they are, and that their roles have the same status and recognition as professions like nursing and social work, be both inside but also beyond our sector. And Skills for Care is the membership body for registered managers in England, and we think that managers need and deserve the same opportunities for development and that other professionals in the sector can access. If we just move on to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about those registered professionals in the sector. So this just gives a sense of the scale of other registered professionals working in social care. So about 17,000 social workers, 3,500 OTs, and 41,000 nurses. And these have been really core in supporting people through the pandemic. And you can see it's quite a large group. We were commissioned by the Chief Social Worker for adults to do a professional leadership development programme for about 100 principal social workers, and that developed a blended approach: action learning sets, mentoring, which again has come up a few times already this morning, and a leadership impact project which emphasised shared learning. And I think that the reflections that I have from that, I think, can be shared among other leadership cohorts. So the importance of networking, the importance of support, of reflective space, that's really important. And I think that resonates with what we found with registered managers as well. So just move on to the next slide. So I think another area that we need to focus on is supporting more workers from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities to take on leadership roles. We know from our data that 21% of the workforce are from minority ethnic communities, but only 17% of our managers are from those same communities. So that sense of the snowy white peaks, I think, is real in social care. And the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on BAME colleagues was one of the reasons that Skills for Care launched a survey of adult social care workers who identified as BAME, and we had more than 500 responses. People who responded, and I'm happy to share the findings of that, but people who responded highlighted their experience of institutional and systematic racism, and also a lack of development opportunities leading to underrepresentation in senior roles. So this is a deep and a wide problem, and as a sector, I think we need to better support aspiring leaders from a BAME background, but we also need to have some honest conversations about the other barriers, the racism, discrimination that people are facing. And I think we need to be allies for our BAME colleagues, and I know that Udi's going to talk about that a little bit later in the session. So just to give a sense of some of the things that Skills for Care is doing. So we are producing a number of programmes based on some of the things that came out of the survey. We're launching a new Moving Up programme, and for those who don't know what that programme is, that's our successful but quite small scale programme that supports aspiring BAME leaders and managers. And we're also launching a new frontline programme of support aimed at BAME staff. I think we need to keep talking about and hearing from our colleagues about their experiences in social care, so that we make sure that what we say is more than rhetoric, and we need to have strong leadership, I think, talking about equality, diversity and inclusion more. Okay, just my final slide then. So just thinking about the future, I think we need to be looking out beyond the yearly cycle that we tend to be in, and looking much more towards the future. And so just in the immediate future, I think we're looking at revising some of the level 5 qualifications for registered managers and leaders to include the skills and knowledge that we've identified during the pandemic as a sector, and also looking at progression routes into and out of the qualification for leaders who wish to go further. We're also looking at specific targeted learning around management skills that we've identified with the sector as being missing with some leaders. And I think we also need to think as a sector about the future of the balance of skills between generalist and specialist that we need in the sector. We're building more diverse and inclusive culture, building that thinking more into our work. So looking at a programme supporting wider equality, diversity, inclusion around LGBTQ and gender isolation in care to support leaders and managers, as well as the work with BM leaders as well. And more broadly, developing a talent pipeline so we can identify future leaders and make sure that they get the right support to grow into leadership roles. And I also think it's really important that we all plan and work in partnership with others. So I'm a real advocate of collaboration and partnership working, and we're talking quite a lot with ADAS, LGA, NHS, SCIE and others about how we build some of the lessons of systems leadership and spread that further into our sector. So I'll finish off there, but just I just wanted to be clear, I suppose, that the one thing that we've learned from the pandemic is that, I suppose, without the sort of leaders and managers we have in place, our system just couldn't have carried on. And I think we need to take this opportunity to be supporting people now and to be thinking about the future. So that's all for me, Kathryn. I look forward to hearing any questions.
That's great, thanks, Oonagh. And we've got lots of questions in question and answers that I'm going to come to in a second. I have to say, as a former registered manager, I couldn't agree more with the notion that we need to recognise the professionalism and dedication that comes with that post. Okay, let's move on to the questions. And we've got a lot of questions here, so let's see how many we can get through in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So the first question is for Jane. So Jane, what inspired the visual business plan, and have you found that your workforce are more engaged or have gotten bored with it more through using this approach?
Yeah, thanks very much. Great question. Yes, I think we were really conscious. So as you said in the introduction, I've been chief exec for quite a while. And when I first got the chief exec job, I started writing this big long tome and realized that most people were not going to read this document. It was Mario, who's my head of communications, director of comms, who said, we need to do this in a different way. So we have had in Anchor and then in Anchor Hanover a visual business plan for quite a long time. And actually, it's now very much part of how we do stuff. So as well as refreshing our plan every year, we have events where colleagues give feedback on which bits of the plan we're doing well, which bits of the plan we're not doing so well. You might have noticed the plan talks about the 4 mores, so more homes, more opportunities, more influence and more efficient. And it's introduced by a character called Maureen. That's how clever my comms team are. They took the 4 mores and they gave me Maureen. But actually, so we made films about Maureen and how we're doing with the plan. And I think it really has made a difference in a big organisation where, with the best will in the world, even without a pandemic going on, our ability to talk to 10,000 people who are very busy and running services is quite limited. So for us, it really has made a difference. And I'm more than happy if people want to drop me an email to send people a copy of the overall plan, because what you saw was just a brief summary of it.
Great, thank you, Jane. Next question, I'm going to come to Oonagh. Oonagh, what do you believe we can do to attract more people in the industry to close the gap on employment in our sector?
So I was really struck by Jane's example because it's one that I feel like I use quite a lot. So we've got 18% of the workforce is male, and I'm always curious around how we get more men to come in and work in the sector, because it feels like if we could do that, that's one really tangible way that we can close that gap. When we look at our predictive analysis and skills for care, it gives us a sense of where most of the turnover is, and that I think gives us a sense of where to focus. So young people, for example, about 1 in 2 will leave in the first year that they join a role, and so I think if we can get better at finding out what's driving that and seeing what we can do to fix it. I think there is something about career pathways and career progression, and the pay differentials. I think it makes it a little difficult. So if you're the most experienced care worker and you've been working for 25 years in social care, then you'll be paid on average about 12p an hour more than someone who's only just started, and that does make it tricky. But I think the more that we can help people see the potentials in careers in care, particularly young people, I think that would help. And it feels like there's something about flipping the narrative about social care, and I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but when we think of the strength of social care, what we do in our communities, what we add in our communities in terms of people's lives, in terms of the local economy, 40 billion a year to the local economy from social care, and I feel like how we talk about social care could change, and that might also help to attract people.
Great, thanks, Oonagh. I'm going to say this next question could be for either of you, but I'm going to go back to Jane on it. So Jane, do you think there is enough diversity at the very top of social care leadership, for example, chief execs, chief finance officers and operation director level?
No, not yet. I think things are on the move. So when I first became chief exec of Anchor, I would often be the only woman in the room. When I went to external meetings, that's certainly changed. But still there is not sufficient diversity from a BAME perspective in senior roles. So I think, to go back to my point about it's so important, the quality of decision making, the quality of engagement. Our organisations are better for having a diverse range of views around every table. And so in my organisation, my finance director is a woman. We have a degree of diversity at a senior level around gender. We're not where I want us to be in terms of being an organisation that's fully reflective of the sectors that we work in. And similarly, I would say issues around disability. I know the percentage of people living with disability in the community is significantly higher than the percentage of people in senior positions who are living with disabilities. So we've definitely got a long way to go. I think we should celebrate the successes that we have achieved, but we need to accelerate the speed of movement in that direction.
Great, thank you, Jane. I'm going to bring the last question to Oonagh. I'm sorry we haven't got to your questions if you've put them in. We've got a lot of questions here. If we get more chance, maybe we'll come back to some of them at the end. So the last question to you, Oonagh. In my experience as a former registered manager, peer support efficacy is determined by individual team dynamic and culture. Thus, it becomes problematic where there may be disparity in culture and dynamics. How can parity and efficacy of peer deliberation be brought to provide seamless support for members?
So I think that I would say that resonates. We all know that no model works without context, and context is the people involved in the groups. I think what we have found is that people will self-select if they're finding that their peer network isn't giving them what they need, and they'll reform and regroup somewhere else. And in a lot of ways, I think we have to trust people with in their judgment, and we have to be the facilitator of the networks, but not too directive, because I think we've got to trust people to use their own judgment in terms of what they need. I feel like that's a bit of a fluffy answer, but it feels like there's no one model to say this is what peer support should look like. I think the strength of it has to be in the co-production, I think.
Great, thank you, Oonagh. So there are some great questions still in the Q&A box, so I'm going to see if we've got time to come back to some of them after we've heard from the next two panellists. But for now, I'm going to move us on. So, sorry, just multitasking. So if I just remind everybody again, especially for those that joined a little late, of the Care Talk conference that's coming up in association with SCIE, the Social Care Institute for Excellence. This is From New Normal to a New Future, on the 30th of June at the Mermaid in London, hopefully a face-to-face conference, which I'm very excited about. Any of the delegates today will receive an email giving them a discount for booking online within the next month, so do get booked into that. We've got some great speakers confirmed. We've just heard this morning that we've even got Sir Simon Stevens confirmed, so that's really great, really looking forward to that. And also just to remind everybody to get your nominations in for the Great British Care Awards and the Social Care Leadership Awards. So now I'm going to move us on to our next speaker, who is Professor Uduak Archibong. I'm very, very delighted to be announcing Uduak. She's perhaps one of the most inspirational speakers I've heard on this subject, and I've actually, Uduak, personally taken away a lot of actions from the last conference I was listening to on for my own organisation. So I hope everybody gets a lot out of this. And Uduak, I also understand we have congratulations in order as you've recently become a grandparent. So great news there, congratulations. So Uduak directs the Centre for Inclusion and Diversity and provides strategic oversight for equality, diversity and inclusion across the institution. Recognised by the British government and the Queen for her services to higher education and equality, she was awarded an MBE in the 2015 Queen's New Year's Honours List. Uduak's nursing career began in Nigeria in the 80s, and she graduated from the University of Nigeria and obtained her PhD from the University of Hull in 1995. She is a Fellow of the West African College of Nursing and a Fellow of the Royal College of Nursing. Uduak has served as a visiting professor at several international universities, and she's been recognised as a foremost authority on inclusion and diversity and become the first ever UK Professor of Diversity with a cross-disciplinary and institutional portfolio. Welcome, Uduak, and over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Kathryn. You did embarrass me there. Can you remind people that I'm not a grandma, but a glamma? I have to.
sorry, glamma.
I'm a glamma, big time. So thank you so much for inviting me to contribute. And as you've heard, I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Bradford. And it's a real joy to speak to you about the value of diversity and inclusion in social care. What I'm going to do is just talk through some of the things, some descriptions of what I see as diversity and inclusion in social care delivery, in the social care workforce, actually beginning to tease the things I always say to people, that we cannot lose sight of the role of different kinds of people in building evidence and utilizing evidence, because I believe that sometimes we are very anecdotal in the way we do our diversity and inclusion. So how do we contribute to building and using evidence? And then looking at social care education, and finally, I'll touch on the implications for leadership. Next slide, please. So for me, I think the context is very, very clear. And I just, every time when I look at and listen to the news, I am just looking at a world that is so broken in terms of its social care and health agenda. The global challenges are vast. I think the pandemic for me is a real amplifier. It's telling the world that we are human beings and we can be broken, but the beauty is with pandemic, everybody sees the negative side, and I do, but the positive thing about pandemic is it does give us opportunity to be in touch with our humanity. We've seen changing demographics, health inequalities on the rise, and we've seen a lot of disparities in not just ethnic lines. There are issues around LGBT community and the experiences they have. I was very, very shaken about November last year when I led a conference looking at Trans Day of Memorial, and that 350 people had been killed all over the world, and some of them in very, very sad circumstances, being strangled, because what the pandemic has done is put people in places that they would usually walk away. So you are with your family all the time as part of the lockdown, and we saw a lot of cases of deaths for people from trans communities from that. We've seen our social care landscape is rapidly evolving. I listened the other day about how if we don't quickly arrest this situation of us families not having times with members, people are choosing to keep their family members at home. We've seen that the people's expectation of social care is rapidly changing. We have limited resources. We want improvement and accountability, and the earlier speakers have spoken about this. And then the big one about integrated care for clients and communities. And therefore, now is the time that I believe very strongly that diversity and inclusion does matter. It matters in the way we deliver our care, who delivers the care, how we build research so that we can be very astute and evidence-based in our delivery, social care education, and the leadership to do with that. Next slide, please. I love this bit. Right, so what does diversity create then? So I'll start with the box, the blue box on the left. It does create opportunity. It brings new perspectives to bear. It brings innovation, competitive advantage, but it also breeds challenges, more work, chaos, conflict. Now you have to ask yourself the question, because often people jump to, oh, let's not have diversity then because it's going to create conflict. And the challenge I put to people is then you continue to have your archaic ways of doing things, you know, having that diversity of thought. But you can have the best of both worlds. So you have the diversity and you make that diversity work. So a colleague, this Stefana, and another person did some work in the 2000s, and really looking at how you create value with diverse teams, and identified that there are clearly two types of diverse teams. The diverse team that is not managed properly will always destroy and create chaos. But where a diverse team is properly managed, then you have a team that creates, that promotes high performance within your organization. Next slide, please. So this takes me to the point where I can actually say that your diversity can transform your organization. We've seen work by McKenzie and other authors who actually show that when you bring diversity of thought together, that you have more. You can have high performance, greater effectiveness, new levels of success. We can go beyond where we are now and so forth. So I always say to people, yes, we talk diversity, and diversity is fantastic because that is what happens to us without us really doing much. So it is present, our differences that we bring to bear. Inclusion is when we make that mix, that diversity work, and we respect that diversity. But the next level is where we allow that diversity to transform our organization, because managed inappropriately, our diversity is not going to create innovation. But if you manage diversity appropriately, then that's when it's going to transform. So rather than continuing to count heads, how many Black people do we have, how many disabled people, we're beginning to say, when you finally get them, can you make them count? Can you make that diversity count within your organization? And it's through this that you transform your organization. Next slide. So in terms of diversity in social care delivery, then I just want to just highlight a few things. I think for me, the first thing there is really to say that the health and social care needs are changing rapidly. And I kid you not, when I sit in conversations where people lie to themselves that the pandemic will only leave us with 3 years of problems, I often smile and think, gosh, can you stop deceiving us? Because the consequences of this pandemic will go through to the next 20 years. And you can just imagine the implications for the things that we do in health and social care. Majority of the factors that affect people, progression, some of the things that the other speakers have talked about, are not necessarily about individuals in the population. We need to begin thinking about the structures, the infrastructures, the systems that ingrain health inequalities. Those systems, because I would say it's so easy to fix individuals because you can send them to all the courses if it depends on them. With cognitive dissonance, they've had enough to change things if it was at the individual level. But sadly, even if you send me to the best Springboard program as a woman and I come back to an institution that is not ready for me, I have no chance. And therefore, we need to really think about the structures that oppress, the structures in our organizations that stop people from gaining, from progressing. So there's persistent social inequalities and disparities within our systems. So we've heard some of the statistics today, and I will come back to that when I look at diversity in social care workforce. There is more demand for evidence-based social care policies and practices. Now, I can say this time and time again, some of the problem we have with vaccine hesitancy is how people have used research in the past to undermine humanity. Where we've got the syphilis research, where we want Black people to not be given treatment because if we leave them long enough, X will develop. We've seen how those French scientists got together and said, if we test this out in Africa, they're deplorables. And therefore, what that has left us with is the fact that people are not believing us. That's why we have to put up so many ads. I took, when I had my first injection vaccine, I had to put it on all social media just to convince people, because there is that mistrust. So we need to start thinking about evidence-based policies that are believable, that involves all of us. And I will say a little about that. Next slide, please. Right, in terms of social care workforce, we've already heard this, that we do have many, our diversity in the frontline service, but when it comes to those who are actually leading, we do have issues. So I was reading a report, who is leading in terms of, and with that freedom of information request, over 90% of those who are leading social care are white. So the others are non-white. And if you think about, in terms of, we've heard about 18% of the workforce or less are men. So you start thinking, and I was really reminded last year when there was this big thing and a Black man has been murdered on the streets of Minneapolis, and people are then asking the questions, where are we going in our world? Because we know, and I heard from Oonagh's report about the descriptions of lived experience that actually tells us that racism is real in social care institutions. This racism that are very structural and we cannot run out of it and we have to accept it. It has huge implications for people staying in social care workforce. But the big question for me is, why is it that we have a workforce that is diverse, and when we get to the top, the isolation is there because there are too few, the snowy pig syndrome, where you have too few people that are different leading, and we've heard this from the earlier speakers. And then I always use my beautiful cartoon here of the man who sits there, even in our recruitment processes where we cannot see diversity because we're basing it on our own identity. We want to recreate ourselves. So what happens with a non-diverse leadership is, if you don't put artificial processes in place, you continue to recreate yourself. You recreate yourself because you think you are better, others are not as good. And then the big thing I have been reading about issues of dignity and respect. When we are in a space that we are, where the world is being challenged, we're all fighting over PPE, especially in those early days. What you see is high levels of harassment, issues of breaches around dignity and respect. And I have seen that in literature around social care workforce. Next slide, please. Then if we move on to the next bit about how do we ensure that evidence gathering is inclusive enough so that I can see myself in that evidence and I can believe that in that lab where we are creating things, we're talking about vaccines and so on, that we have different kinds of people contributing. So there has been COVID denial, and I have no problem with that because I can see people saying, are you sure this is true? Is this a way to wipe up particular groups and so on? Because we have a history in our world where that has happened. But the big deal is, who is doing this social care research? Who are the people who are contributing to that evidence-based policies around social care? We need to show that this is about all of us. And therefore, when we are recruiting and looking at who's delivering care and so on, we also need to look at who are the people generating evidence. Collecting and using data cannot just be with one group of people. I believe very strongly that we need to see involvement of everybody in the whole evidence generation, utilization, synthesis cycle, so that we can all believe. Let's look at social needs together. Do we have LGBT colleagues in social care that are involved in also generating evidence? How are we democratizing evidence building process so that people believe this data? The big thing is the reciprocity. I'm sick and tired of just working with older people when it comes to collecting data. How are we involving them in contributing to how we decide, we make decisions about which areas of research, the methodology we use? How do we bring that in? I really had to throw that in because I'm just concerned about some of the issues we hear about people not accepting evidence. So in social care, we need to start thinking of how do we promote a climate for inclusion so that evidence building and utilization is something we all agree with. Next slide. So this bit here about if we really want to think about diversity in the social care delivery, in the workforce, in leadership, then we need to start from the basics of how do we educate the future workforce. So in terms of social care education, we must discard these notions of exclusivity in our education. Embracing new models of inclusive excellence is the way forward. In my university, we are really pushing for decolonization of everything that we do. And I kid you not, people automatically think when we talk about decolonial work in universities, we're looking at only BAME stuff. No, I'm really sorry. If you look at coloniality of gender as we speak, we must begin to ask questions of our processes to say, what is this gender mindset that is thinking that we must behave in this way or the other way? So decolonization of our curriculum in social care is not just about race, it's also about other aspects of diversity. For the students, if we think in this way, it strengthens scholarship and prepares them for engaging with today's complex and diverse world. By doing this, we are strengthening our scholarship and preparing students for engagement with today's complex world. The world is so complex. Sometimes I'm sitting there, you need to be so educated to see how issues of discrimination have been woven into things that you need to be so clever to untangle them and begin to create solutions. Next slide, please. So this is about the leadership bit then. I knew I would get to this. I'm just thinking, yes, we will never get to a point where we directly match our leaders in terms of numbers to the people who are working within social care, to the people that we care for. Yes, I understand. But what we need to do is actually equip all leaders to be inclusive in the way they lead, because our demographics are changing. They have changed. We no longer have homogeneous cultures in our workplaces. Traditional leadership is no longer effective. Hierarchical corporate structures are not effective, and they're very incompatible with the world that we live today. We need to begin to look at leaders that build relationship, that share responsibility. Leadership behavior that is powerful and promotes performance is that which is shared. It has to be built around relationship. We need to break down the barriers to progression experienced by minoritized staff in our organizations. Next slide, please. This is just quickly to say we hear a lot about inclusive leadership and people talk, and I'm getting worried because it's like a little cliche. But the real stuff is when you look at the diagram on the right, that diagram insists that an inclusive leader, yes, focuses on results, but leverages diversity and talent. leads the culture, leads themselves. So it's not just about how I lead others, but how am I leading myself in a culturally competent way, and how do I lead relationship? There are different things that will come into that, about authenticity, about values and how you work around that, how courageous you are, because there are decisions you will make around positive action that it takes a lot of courage. Next slide, please. And I promise you that this is my final slide. Well, near final. It's about adopting a whole systems approach. If we need to get this diversity and inclusion thing right, we need to acknowledge that the problem is in our organizations. And I'm very proud in the way the earlier speakers have spoken, because there has to be that element of accepting that it's not just that organization where there is discrimination, or that organization. I'm saying to institutions, this is time for you to accept that it is happening. It's not just it can happen here. Because once you acknowledge, you quickly go into, how do I create safe spaces so people can talk about their lived experiences so that we can all learn? We need strong leadership to take us in this way. We need to create those inclusive environments. And I did talk about getting evidence, but for goodness sake, getting evidence should never be a barrier. I'm sick and tired of people saying, I haven't got enough data, so I keep collecting data. But in that process, we are having people who are hurting, people that have been harmed emotionally because of how discrimination is traveling, because we keep thinking, let's collect more data and collect more data. But what we want to do is we collect, we use, get that evidence, use the evidence. It is now time for us to really say, it is about accountability. Accountability that takes on board my 6 C's, that the organization and the leaders and all of us are committed. We collaborate, we communicate. We have to keep stopping and checking and stopping and checking. Celebrate when we have to, but continuous improvement is really important for taking us there. And my final slide, please. Just to remind you that we need to take actions at all levels. The middle graphics there, the diagram there is saying, please, let's stop pretending that we do not know that to produce equality or inequality will involve overlapping factors that are linked to organizational cultures, individual factors, and institutional structures. What we're doing at the moment is we keep fixing the individual factors. If I just teach BAME people one more way of speaking English, they will be fantastic. No, I'm sorry, they won't, if the structures are not good enough. If the institutional structures, the systems are foul, no matter how we keep fixing individuals, we are not going to get it. So I propose that we go for, yes, let's fix the numbers, but it's not just about representation, it's about participation as well. But we must fix our institutions, target biases. And I don't want us to keep thinking we'll do unconscious bias training. That's not good enough. There are other things you must do so that we debias our institutions and enhance diversity perspective in everything we do. So that at the end, this is what individuals who work in our social care organizations will experience. 4 key things. They'll feel significant. They'll feel that they are appreciated. They will walk away feeling valued and they feel they belong. And lastly, they are part of everything that you do. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Udi. Inspirational, motivational as ever, and give us all a telling off while you're at it about what we can do better, which I really like, really gets me thinking. So thank you. And I can see lots of comments in the chat sharing that they found that inspirational too. Now I'm going to hand over to Clenton Farquharson. MBE is a disabled person with lived experience of health and social care. Clenton employs his own personal assistant and he looks after his 85-year-old mum's personal budget. He's chair of the Think Local Act Personal Partnership Board. He's a trustee of SCIE, so one of my bosses, have to make sure I'm behaving myself, and a member of the Coalition for Personalised Care, as well as a member of the social care sector COVID-19 group. Over to you, Clenton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathryn. Following Udi, wow, if I knew that before, I probably wouldn't have took the slot, but that was a really powerful presentation, Uduak, so thank you for that. Today, I will be discussing in this presentation seven points. The first is leadership through lived experience, and then the second is which prisms do we look through, and the third, the puzzle of leadership and diversity, and then the fourth point that I want to get through is leadership that wants order, and then the fifth is leadership that accepts difference, and the sixth point that I want to try and make is survival of the kindest, and then the seventh point is around relationships, not transactions. But let's start with lived experience and what that means to me. Basically, lived experience is a direct first-hand experience of past or present, of social issues or social issues, or injustice or injustices, which display into knowledge, perspectives, insight, understanding gathered through your lived experience. Also leads to innovators, leaders who have activated their lived experience to inform and shape and lead their social purpose work, often in combination with their learned and practice experience to directly benefit the communities we share those experiences with. The language that is evolving around lived experience and its acceptance in structures that govern society still require clarity. And labels that apply to or adopted by people with lived experience may need to change or be removed. This will help ensure people who engage in the system, and especially in care and support, and have lived experience, are included because of their wisdom and insight, especially as leaders, but which is grounded in value-based and hopefully people-focused, and focuses on the life outcomes, and in doing so makes the overarching intentional actions about living a good life of one's choosing, with meaning, purpose and connection. It positions care and support as something that reaffirms our identity and protects rather than threatening the things that matter to us and a just world. So leadership means to me, basically, it's about people caring about and supporting one another. And if we could go to the next slide. Okay. We can look at diversity through two prisms. One is looking at it alongside gender, ethnic background, disability, religion, sexual orientation, and other diversity issues. Everyone has probably heard the saying, great minds think alike. Well, the other second element of diversity is diverse thinking. And you want great minds thinking unalike. It really helped me to see how important it is to have support and a workforce capable, not just of diverse thought, but that they feel comfortable and safe to express those thoughts in front of peers and colleagues. Being open to others' experiences and being willing to accept it, even when it doesn't match our own as leaders. And if I could go to the next slide. My experience of leadership and diversity in social care is that it is like a puzzle that we are trying to solve. The core element of this puzzle that needs to fit into place is listening. Leaders often hear what they want to hear. They are in echo chambers. Active listening is about being open to other people's experience that are different to your own. A good leader listens and facilitates a listening culture. It needs courage too, because it's about creating a safe space for uncomfortable conversations, which may lead to uncomfortable truths that will emerge as a result. For example, when the topic of racism comes up, leaders can become defensive and switch off. Now, if we could go to the next slide, please. Now, leadership that wants order. It's a bit like the Rubik's Cube. All the colours and all the sides are sorted. This reminds me social care leaders tend to want to group people according to categories, labels, like arranging the colours on the sides of the Rubik's Cube. It's very neat, but people are not neat. We're human and we're messy. That means a good leader has to be accepting of difference inherent in individuals. And personalised care and support is about looking at me as a whole person, not taking a one-size-fits-all approach. And if we could go to the next slide. Leadership that accepts difference. And like the Rubik's Cube, that is unsorted. So a good leader is one who recognises and welcomes diversity and is happy with the Rubik's Cube that looks like this. But simply throwing a mix of people together doesn't guarantee high performance teams. It requires, as other speakers have talked, inclusive leadership. Leadership that assumes that all people and team members difference feel they are treated respectfully, fairly, and are valued, and have the sense that they belong and are confident and inspire. Leadership that accepts difference needs strong creative thinking leadership at all levels, more than ever at this time together. And together with diverse and highly motivated workforce to meet the diverse needs of people who draw on care and support. And I think Martin Luther King Jr. was a supporter of this thinking because he said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Now, survival of the kindest. It's interconnected. And what I mean by this, we often hear that if you want to succeed in life, you need to ascribe to the idea of survival of the fittest. Success, we are commonly told, has to be grabbed, it has to be taken, or someone else will get it. My lived experience of leadership is that it works best when it's not hierarchical, but when everyone works together on an even basis in a flat structure that recognises the interconnectivity. So whether you are a person who draws on support of a care worker or a personal assistant, or the hospital porter, or a head of commissioning, you recognise that you work together, as a team, but each individual is a leader in their own line of work. We saw this during the first wave of lockdown, when we saw that refuse collectors became frontline workers. They were as important to our survival as key heads of state with handling of the pandemic and keeping society together. The question is where to turn to for hope. The culture we need to develop is one that values the survival of kindness, not the survival of fitness, of the fittest. Now, a good leader recognises that and encourages that culture amongst all its staff. Curiosity about others. We demonstrate an open mindset and a deep curiosity about others. We listen without judgment and seek with empathy to understand those around us. Now, if we could go to the next slide. Now, relationships, not transaction. We need to remember to reconnect with our humanity, which is what binds us, and think in terms of key human performance indicators, which are human skills, which are needed to communicate effectively, problem solve, collaborate, and organise, are becoming more important for success as the workplace evolves, and socially and technologically, why human skills are so necessary for the success in the modern care and support world. Why human skills are so critical to ensuring care and support success is well into the future. And it is striking those balances of constant hearing key performance indicators. A good leader who accepts diversity is one that engenders the same qualities in their team as in a good marriage: trust, respect, seeing things from the other person's point of view. And there's some data about 50% of marriages end in divorce, 80% of business partnerships fail. They've moved away from the original goal that brought them together. In social care, should be about enabling people like me to have a good life. If we can be clear about the 80% of things we all agree on and focus on them and not get distracted by the 20% that will help us to keep moving forward. So my takeaway message to you is that, in my experience, the best leaders are those that take the person-centered approach that sees across difference with emotional vulnerability. Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What do I mean? First of all, I want to clarify that when we talk about vulnerability, I'm usually referring to emotional vulnerability. When your best friend suggests that you should work on being more vulnerable in your relationship, they're probably not talking about making yourself more physically vulnerable. So vulnerability is about emotions, but being more vulnerable isn't usually in reference to an enjoyable emotions like joy or excitement, although I think they can be. I've learned much about the power of vulnerability and many other things on the Brain Dare to Lead program. Typically, when we talk about being more emotional vulnerable, it has to do with difficulty or painful emotions like sadness, shame, anxiety, frustration, etc. So vulnerability means acknowledging your difficult emotions. Now, it's a human nature to avoid things that hurt, and emotions are no exceptions. So acknowledging your painful emotions can be as simple as pausing for a few seconds and telling yourself, okay, I feel pretty rotten. I'm using polite words because I'm in polite company right now. It's probably because I'm feeling frustrated with my wife for that sarcastic comment she made at dinner, which bothered me and we never addressed. Well, that's obvious, you say. I acknowledge my emotions all the time. What's the big deal? I keep hearing people say. Maybe you are an expert at emotional vulnerability. But in my experience, most of us aren't nearly as good at it as we might think we are. Also, in the fact, vulnerability is a universal human emotion that we feel when we expose ourselves to others during time of risk or uncertainty. Or put another way, the instinct to avoid feeling bad is so baked into human nature that we all do it far more than we realise, often without much conscious awareness, especially, it turns out, when it comes to other people. It's hard enough to acknowledge our painful emotions in private, but it can feel nearly impossible to acknowledge them in front of other people, even people we are close to, like our spouse, parent, and friend. So, accountability and cultural intelligence. We're attentive to others' cultures and adapt as required because they have put all of this as the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. And going back to the jigsaw puzzle I talked about at the start, and what I feel is towards a more just world, it's about listening. It's about accepting difference, inclusivity. But it's also about creating an interconnected culture where we all are leaders, united by kindness and survival of the kindest. And then cultivating relationships, not transactions. I would like to just go on to the last slide and say to people, thank you very much for listening.
So sorry about the technical problems that we're having here with Kathryn. So we have got lots of questions in there. So Uduak and Clenton, please feel free to have a look at the questions, and if you can respond to some of them, that would be amazing. So there's one there for you, Clenton, that says, having had the experience of working with local authorities and CCGs, what can be done to address those who hold the purse strings to support better equality and diversity? Now, feel free, both of you, to answer that question.
From my point of view, I think the biggest vehicle is co-production. You know, and think local at personal, and then my personal, that's the way forward. One of the biggest things is institutions and organisations letting go of power. And I think Uduak mentioned it earlier, power, letting go of power and believing in the wisdom and insights that especially people with lived experience should be informing what needs to be commissioned. And one of the things that people want to know more about is Social Care Future has described what this new social care is, because there is still a lot of debate in the public, how the public think what social care is. There's no true understanding of social care. Social care should be something that enables and facilitates you to have that good life, you know, and it's that's the starting point.
Brilliant.
Uduak?
Thank you, Clenton. Did you have
I'm back now. Can you hear me all right?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I'll pass back over to you, Kathryn. Thank you.
Sorry about that. The joys of technology. Yeah, this is why I'm looking forward to the face-to-face one so much. Actually, on that, I'd like to ask a question about technology, and I wonder if either I'll start with Uduak, perhaps, if you have any examples of how technology might be either a barrier or a support to increasing diversity within social care. And what I'm getting at specifically is that a lot of assistive technology is used across social care now, and I'm wondering if that is seen as either a barrier or otherwise in terms of how we work with people from diverse communities within social care.
Thank you very much, Kathryn, for that, and welcome back. I love how technology can just exert control over people. So I think I definitely see the advantages of using technology, assistive technology, for example. I see that. But I don't want people to lose sight of the humanity around that as well. So what's the human face to technology? It's always a great one. But also barriers like digital poverty and the implications. So for example, I have seen through this pandemic how people can be locked out of things. You just need to watch your television. You have a family of 5. The only tool they have in the system is mom's smartphone, but they're expected to learn as other kids and so forth. So there's something there about how do we address digital poverty so that we can also allow everybody to have a good experience of this. The other thing about technology, and I think the fantastic thing about technology is in social care, and somebody's asked that question, is this going to allow us to have different kinds of workforce? And I say yes. I'm touting nomadic working. The fact that I can stay in Bradford and join a conference in Minneapolis, for example, or do some work for a company somewhere else. If I was to travel there, if I was disabled, first of all, I'll think through accessibility on the flight, I'll think through all sorts. So, but what it does is allows me to work flexibly. We've seen how issues of caring responsibilities and so on are real things for us to check on. But I still have colleagues who say, even with that, I'm better off being at home because I have my kids next door and I could just pop in every now and again. So I see the advantages, but for us to have the maximum benefit of our technology, we really need to address those barriers that might stop some people from getting the full advantage.
Great, thank you, Uduak. Go on.
For me, and that, Kathryn, we have to recognise that digital exclusion must be seen in for the national issue that it is, because I think digital exclusion can be looked at using the 4 A's about the ambition, assumptions, affordability, and access. These are 4 lenses that have massive issues for, if you just think about disabled people and older people's perspective who cannot afford access, and affordability and connectivity is an issue as it hampers their ambition, if the ambition is to live a good life. Now, you've got issues around digital technology such as the internet, and digital devices have how they play an important role in allowing people to access services, attend medical appointments, stay in touch with friends and family. But remembering from the perspective of disabled people, maybe that digital exclusion for multiple reasons, including not having access to the required infrastructure or the devices, or lack of skill, or motivation to use technology. All of this, it's not a one size fits all, and we need to have a conversation, about this, because there is worrying levels of digital exclusion among older people and people with disabilities, and this also needs to be looked at in the overall perspective of poverty. And this played out in education for certain school children and families were digitally excluded to take part in education.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to ask one last question, and I think we need to wrap it up, although we have loads of questions from people. But one last question. Do you think that the move to remote working during the pandemic has increased the opportunities for people from BAME backgrounds to move into leadership roles? And that's a question from Sugra. I'll just say hi, Sugra. Udi, what do you think?
I'd say yes, there is opportunity. However, we do need to manage that carefully. I can say, and I link this to the earlier comment I made about the flexibility that working from home in the way we're doing has really given us this chance to engage in different ways, but we must look at some of the things that might stop us from getting involved. So for example, I was just saying this to an individual the other day. If we're looking at getting BAME people into senior levels and we allow flexible working and so forth, we also need to think through the other issues about what educational facilities have we got that might help them so it frees people to actually do the work in the way we're doing. So there are bits, but I don't want us to be complacent that as soon as you start saying, okay, everybody work from home, it's gonna work. We do need to put things, is this thing about how do we manage the structures of oppression that has come to affect us in the way it's done, so that whatever intervention we put in place actually work. So I can see BAME people will thrive from this. Women will thrive, disabled people will thrive, but it cannot just be about allowing people to thrive fumbling along. We need to intentionally put things in place to make that work. So I always talk about inclusion by intention. You cannot just say, okay, we just tested something here and we think if people work from home, they can get on and go senior and so forth. It's not going to work on its own. There are other things we need to manage that power. How do we ensure that we are not complacent about this and just think the individuals will do it? So that deficit model cannot be applied. If we have to allow non-traditional leaders to get to the top, there has to be something about us being intentional in the way we support them, because we know that the greatest problems that we have linked nicely with our structures and our systems. They're all ingrained, so we need to do something.
Great, thank you very much. I think I'm going to have to wrap it up there because we are out of time. Just to make sure everybody knows that quite a few of the questions were answered directly in the Q&A. So if you didn't hear a verbal answer to your question, you might find it in the Q&A panel. So do have a look. Thank you to all of our panelists. Really, really appreciate that. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I think if any of you have looked in the chat box, you can see that that's been echoed throughout. I think it's been a really, really good presentation. So thank you to everybody. So finishing off now, I just want to remind everybody that we have some podcasts, and the link to the podcast should be in the chat box if it's not already. Remind you again of the upcoming conference that Care Talk and SCIE are delighted to be co-hosting in the summer, and again you will get a discount code if you apply for that online, having been here. Final reminder for nominations to the awards. And thank you again to our sponsors for sponsoring us, to Relias for sponsoring the event, and just let everybody know about their complimentary course, which is showing up here, and you should receive a link to that in your follow-up email. Thank you everyone for attending, and we will be sending out the recording of today's session to everybody that's registered. Thank you all again. Apologies for the slight technical hitch, and I'll see you all at the next one. Thank you all. Bye-bye.